I was born on October 13, 1920.
Where would that be? Where were you born?
I was born in Pittsfield, at home. In those days, our moms did not go to the hospital.
And could you tell us a little bit about your family?
Yes, my mom was Catholic. My father had been baptized as a Baptist. He was a good Christian. And we used to say often, "Daddy, tell us the story of your baptism again," because he was baptized like he was about 14, standing in the water, and so he used to tell us the story. Although my mother was Catholic and my father was a Protestant, a Baptist, we got along well. And we had a good Christian home.
How many children in your family?
My mother had 3 children after. I had 2 brothers, and then one was a stillbirth, so I never got to know that one. But she always had a problem having children. So I had 2 brothers who we grew up together, and we loved one another. And once my parents were gone, I could count on my brothers for a lot of things.
And what did your father, what kind of work, what was life like in Pittsfield?
Well, my father worked at the General Electric. And in 1929, when they had the Depression began, his work was reduced to a few days. So he went to the Union Station. He always loved trains. And he began to ask if there was any employment there. And he was able to get a few days working in the baggage room. And soon after, when the plant where he was working in the General Electric closed, he went full-time to the Union Station. He began in the baggage room, but later, before he finished his work there, he was one of the head ones at the Union Station. And we were able to travel on the trains without paying a fare.
So you experienced as a family the Depression.
Well, yes. So, we never really got totally poor. In the meantime, I had a great uncle that was a priest, and we would visit him in Canada. And well, slowly I began to think, I'd like to be a sister.
Did you know the sisters?
No, I didn't know any sisters until the daughters came in 1937. But I saw the Daughters of the Holy Spirit. I was in high school. And, I didn't get to know them personally right away. But I went to visit my uncle when I was about maybe 18. And he took me to some sisters there, and I spent a day with them, but I knew I didn't want to join with them because they never went home. And my father not being a Catholic, I didn't think it would be a good idea either. So I returned, and I found a way to get to know our sisters better. I began to take piano lessons with them. And after a few lessons, I met Sister Maria Michaud for the first time. She was already in Pittsfield. And from there, I began to get ready to enter the convent, except the war broke out, and my 2 brothers, one was overseas, and the other one, we didn't know if he would go overseas or not. And my mom wasn't too well at the same time. So I stayed home until the war was over, and my brothers had returned. So that was 1946. I finally entered the convent.
How old were you in
I was going to be 25. I entered in September, and I was going to turn 25 in October. But
So from your first inklings, when you were 18 or 19, you kept that desire, you kept that intention?
yes, well, I had boyfriends, and I thought of marrying a couple times, but I never lost sight of becoming a sister.
So you entered in 1946. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure.
That journey of what happens when
Well,
one
I
comes
came, and you won't believe this. On the 10th day, they dressed me as a nun and sent me to Waterbury, Connecticut to teach. I had no college yet. And one of the sisters at St. John's Convent in Waterbury, she helped me prepare my lessons. And I really, I had already got my AA from college. Back then, yeah, I received my AA, I think. Anyway, no, I hadn't yet. That was later. But they sent me to Waterbury. And I had my first year of teaching, dressed as a nun, the old habit. And with the help of the sister who sat down with me and prepared my lessons with me, I did pretty well. We had at that time parish children, children from the Italian parish, children from the Irish parish, and also some DPs. The DPs had come over from Lithuania. Now, I didn't know it was a Lithuanian parish until I went to Mass the first Sunday morning, and they weren't speaking French. It was a Lithuanian parish. So that was my first experience in teaching. Dressed as a nun, even though I had just entered 10 days before. The year went well, all things considered.
So that's my question. So then after a year, did you come back to be a postulant or a novice? Or
Yes, I
so
did.
Start by saying after?
After a
that
year,
Hold on, wait till we all stop talking, and go ahead.
after a year, I returned to the provincial house where we had our religious formation, and I went through my postulate and my novitiate and made profession on August 16, 1949. Here in the United States, I did not go to France.
Okay. And so after profession, what kind of works did you do? What kind of ministries? What was your life like after your profession?
Well, the first year, I went up to Vermont to teach, Swanton, Vermont, which was almost to the border of Canada. That was far. I taught third grade. I enjoyed teaching, but the following summer, I was returned to Waterbury, where I taught 6 more years. I was there until after the flood of 1955. It was very interesting. I had Lithuanian children, some were displaced children. The strange part was when I first went to Waterbury, I didn't realize I was in a Lithuanian parish until I went to Mass the first Sunday morning. And they weren't talking French. I wasn't sure. No one told me they were not. No, it wasn't a French parish. But I got used to it. In fact, I learned how to say the Hail Mary in Lithuanian. I don't know if I could still say it today, but it began Spanka Maria. I enjoyed my years in Waterbury. Yeah.
And then you had more teaching experience?
Well, in 1955, we had the big flood there, and that was very hard because we had to travel 2 miles to school every day because part of the road we usually took was cut off by the flood. So we had to go all around. It was a circular trip to school every morning in a car. The pastor would come in the station wagon, take as many as he could first trip, then the rest of us a second trip. And, well, it was interesting, but not doable really for a long period. But then they finally had to fix the roads, and yeah, the flood, Waterbury was hard hit during that flood. One of my students lost her mother in the flood. Yeah, it was a bad flood. At the time of the flood, the water stopped, actually, almost unbelievable, across the street from our convent. We were packed to go and spend time with sisters up on the hill if we had to. But the last pool of water was right across the street from the convent.
So you left Waterbury after that flood?
In 1956. And from there, I went to Jewett City. And while in Jewett City, the Bishop of Norwich was Bishop Flanagan. He wanted a sister, a daughter of the Holy Spirit, to give a demonstration lesson in teaching religion at the Religious Education Congress. And he called our convent and asked for someone. Well, the superior at the time says to me, my name was Sister Edmo Therese then. She said, would you mind going? So I said, no. And I started to prepare a lesson, and I talked to the parents and got 7 or 8 of my children. The parents were going to take them down, and I would actually just teach a lesson in religion. Well, somehow that started me in doing more work outside the parish and teaching religion or religious education to adults. That's what set that off. It worked well, and I heard one of the people in the room ask one of the students, does she always teach like that? She said, oh, of course. So I just had a gift for teaching religion.
So that set you off on a whole other chapter of your life.
Yes, it did.
Lillian, tell
Yes.
us about that.
Yes. Well, I didn't start going around to parishes right away, but I knew that religious education was what I really wanted to do. And when I moved to Worcester, I moved to the Worcester Diocese, and a few years after that, the priest who was the director of the Office of Religious Education had known me in Pittsfield. So he invited me to be on their board of education. And from then on, I began to teach religious education as a part of my ministry, not full-time. I was still teaching in the school. But then in the year 2000, they named 3 of us. They took us out of school, and the diocese, I was put into religious education full-time in the Leominster Parish, St. Cecilia's. And that was the beginning of my really becoming a full-time religious educator. So for 3 years, I was a religious education coordinator, St. Cecilia's Parish, Leominster, full-time. I was no longer teaching From there, we had a sister in California who passed away. So in 1974, she died, hit by an automobile. And they needed someone to replace her. So I went to West Sacramento, California, where I taught again in the school for 1 year. But since they knew of my religious education background, they told me it would be only for 1 year. But in the meantime, the sisters who were teaching religious education in the St. Ignatius School in Sacramento were dwindling in numbers and had to leave. So this priest in St. Ignatius Parish, a Jesuit parish, was looking for someone for a coordinator. And they had heard about me, and they asked if I would be interested. And I was told to take it. So I became a full-time religious education coordinator in a Jesuit parish, where I stayed for 3 years. And from the Jesuit parish, I went on to the Diocesan Religious Education Office, where I stayed 10 years.
And what did that involve?
Traveling. I traveled up and down the Diocese of Sacramento, which stretched all the way to the Oregon border, giving workshops. And then besides that, since I was a diocesan employee, I had to go to different workshops in different parts of California. So I traveled most of California. The only part I probably didn't see was San Diego. I was up and down. And then when they had their diocesan congresses, or they used to have a really big congress in in Los Angeles, I was often I used to introduce the speakers, something like that. But I got to know people from all around. Yeah. I was in California for 14 years. But in 1988, the provincial asked me to return to the East Coast. So naturally, I came. They had set up, they already had different ministries for me. One was to edit the newsletter of the province. And the other, I went to the development office and started to edit their newsletter. They found I could write.
So that was a whole change.
Yes, that was it.
And was that what you were doing before you retired?
No, you really didn't. I didn't get to before going to the development office, they sent me to Vermont, where I was religious education coordinator for the first time. Actually, not first time, but first time up there. And I traveled to Enosburg, Vermont. But they kept me there only 3 years because they wanted me down in this area. So I returned, and in the meantime, they were renewing this whole building. It was becoming a retirement center. But I also went to the Sisters of Mercy. We had sent some of our sisters over to the Sisters of Mercy in West Hartford. So I was going to West Hartford and visiting and being with our sisters. and I was named to their board of education, their board of trustees. So I had connections with Hartford at the same time, and they sent me back to Hartford to live for a while.
So a lot of what you're talking about here, let's get into, who is the they, and they're always sending you.
Oh, I should
right?
say the provincial. The provincial, those who were in charge of the province.
So let's talk about the sending. What does that do to you each time you get a new call or a new obedience, we call them? How did,
Well, no,
Remember-
I think about it, and, and sometimes I would have liked to have stayed where I was, doing what I was doing. But, like leaving Sacramento was a sacrifice for me. Yeah, because I had been there so long. And leaving Vermont, after I had come back, I only stayed a short while in Vermont. It was a little bit of a sacrifice, but, as a religious, I got just used to being sent new places. So then,
is there something in there about the vow of obedience? Could you talk about that a little?
well, yes, the vow of obedience, I had taken the vow of obedience, so I never said no to a request. Even though I would have loved to have stayed probably in California, I would have loved to have stayed in Vermont. I didn't say no when they asked me anything. It meant leaving a lot behind. I left friends behind who still write to me from Vermont. I have some who still write to me from California. I have one consultant that worked with me, has the same birthday I do, and we still send each other cards on our birthdays, because her birthday's October 13th also, and she's still in California. I really, there was a lot of personal growth from going different places and doing different things in different places.
Could you talk a little bit about that personal growth?
Well, it seems I've been just lucky in being successful in the different ministries I've had. And I guess, that really, well, it was beneficial to me. I didn't feel I was a failure in any of the ministries I had. That it helped me to grow as a person and to appreciate the things I was doing.
So all the time in these changes in ministry you're going through, there were also changes taking place in the church and in the congregation.
That's true.
So you've lived before and after
Yeah.
Vatican II.
That's right. We had already changed the habit when I went to California. I was wearing secular clothes, at the time. I had removed the veil already. And we were, we're just buying our clothes wherever people bought their clothes, skirts, slacks, and people were accepting us. They weren't.
What other changes happened?
Okay, let me ask, I'm wondering, you after wearing a habit for so many years, what was it like to, that's like your identity. Was it awkward? Was it exciting?
No.
What was
Well,
it?
we still had to wear a congregation symbol, which is the dove that we wear, or we could wear a cross also. But it didn't seem to, there wasn't that much, I don't know, people didn't seem to be talking about it that much. They seemed to have gotten used to it quickly. Our spirit didn't change. They found we were still the same people, loving service, people who gave service to the parish, and they seemed to just take it. It was bound to happen. Some would say it probably should have happened sooner.
Do you remember the first day that you changed your clothes?
Yes.
Where were you and how did that feel?
Well, it came about gradually. The first thing that people noticed, we took the veil off. We took the cloth off. And we came to church that Sunday morning with a veil.
That was in 1954.
And we didn't have we still had to have it on, but it was a veil. It was Easter Sunday, we came with a veil, and they noticed that. So it was rather gradual. They were expecting things after that. And then we shortened our habit. Instead of having it down to the ankles, it came just below the knees. They noticed that. And then we changed into, we were limited in what colors we could buy or wear or make. I think there were some things we couldn't wear, but we wore a navy blue, and most of mine were navy blue or tan. I know the first secular clothes I wore, but we were very limited for a few years. And we're still wearing the veil. But then gradually the veil disappeared, and gradually we could go into different colors, and we still have sisters wearing the veil. We still have sisters wearing a habit, and they had that freedom. Yeah, Sister Marjorie Tuitt came to speak to all of us. She had been invited by the provincial, and it was to help us to get to really take another look at our ministry to the poor, which our first sisters, when they were founded, that was one of their great missions. Their ministry was to work with the poor. And we had become involved in some parishes that were a little like a lot of rich people, especially in San Francisco and in some parishes of Connecticut. So she wasn't all that well received. But I think it was good for us that we had to listen to her and hear where she was coming from. For me, it never bothered me too much, because I was on my way to California. In fact, I was in California when she came. Yes. Yeah.
She stirred up a lot of trouble.
She did stir up trouble, because I think of the way she presented it. It was like, that was the only way you could go, It was almost like forget the rich. But I don't think we can forget the rich. We have to service the poor along with the rich, if that's the case. So, like, she would have liked us to get out of our convent in San Francisco. That's the one thing we didn't like about her, because there were rich people in the convent. Hey, but God's people are both rich and poor. I mean, we weren't servicing only the rich. Even in the San Francisco parish, they had a lot of poor people. In Sacramento, there were poor people. We had to recognize the poor and still continue to serve the poor as well, not make distinctions. After Marjorie Tuitt came, we began thinking about leaving the parish in Fairfax, California, because there were a lot of movie stars that had summer homes there, or additional homes there. And we did start moving out of, in a few years, we were moving out of the that area. It was just north of San Francisco, Fairfax, California. Because there were also poor people up there too. But we began to move out of that area, and we moved down to the Stockton Diocese, which was still poor. Yeah, that was a very poor parish in Stockton that we moved to. I didn't go there because I lived in West Sacramento most of the time that I was in California. But West Sacramento had its poor people too. They had a few rich families, but there were a lot of poor people too that we were helping. Mm-hmm.
So from a very active life, you now are in a retirement center, you're in a healthcare facility.
I'm not fully in retirement, I guess, because my knees went and I stopped walking in March of this year, and I had to be put in wheelchairs and stuff. You know, I can't stand up by myself or even walk a few steps by myself anymore. I've had a few falls, but they're still keeping me busy. And until March of this year, I used to still work in the printing room, doing whatever I could, a few hours a week. And so it's only since March of this year that I've been like in full retirement. Because after I had a few surgeries and I had some falls, and my legs just went. So for 6 months now, I've been in a recliner or a wheelchair. But I've been lucky, my head is in still good shape. And I try to be patient with God's will. We have a good physician here who takes good care of me. I have no constant pain any longer. And I'm still going.
What do you see as your mission now, Lillian? How do you continue from a wheelchair to live your mission?
Through prayer and through, I try to be a person who is, show love as much as I can. Love the sisters' prayer and show love to everyone in whatever way I can. I really, and try to be patient in my, not complain. Be patient. I'd like to walk again, but if that ever happens, the sisters know that I'm not a complainer. I'm accepting God's will each day, and I still write some things. Just last year, they wanted a letter to go to France, so I wrote a piece, and they published it in their newsletter in France. So I do a few things like that, like writing. I had written 7 or 8 sheets before today, different things in my life that helped me to think back about how I've lived, where I've been. It's not always easy. They take me out often around the yard. The days are nice. I get a little fresh air like that. But it's not easy to be in your room most of the day. But I've become so, I guess, accustomed. If I didn't have my head, it probably would be different. But I can, read. They give me good books to read, in which I I enjoy reading. I enjoy watching the news and keeping up with what's going on in the world. There's a lot to pray for there.
As you look back over your life now, Lillian, what do you say now, looking over all of that lifetime?
Thank you, God. Because things could be worse. I mean, like I say, they've been able to, help me. The doctor's been wonderful. So I have no constant pain anymore. They've got, whatever they do for me is helping. And I'm happy I became a religious. I wouldn't go back and want to be someone, do anything different in that score.
I was going to ask you, do you have any regrets?
No, I mean, there were a few times when I was younger when it crossed my mind whether I would continue or not, but I always said that's a temptation, and I never really thought of leaving in that sense.
Any anecdotes?
Stories?
What kind of
Do you
story?
have any stories about?
About my life?
Yeah.
Well, yes, going to all these different places, I had to learn to drive in many places. Like, I walked across the Golden Gate Bridge, but I also had to drive across it in the morning to go down. I had to finish my degree in religious studies in San Francisco after, and I got a degree from Fairfield University, but I finished a lot of my studies in San Francisco, and there were a lot of things I wasn't keen about doing, but I got used to doing, driving around San Francisco. And then one day, one of the sisters had to go right in the heart of San Francisco, had to go to a doctor there. And I had to drive her from Sacramento to this place that was on a hill. And I said, oh no, I wasn't used to driving on hills like that. But I managed it. So there were a lot of things I could have said no to, or they were a little scary, but we got through it. I only had one little car accident in San Francisco, and someone had didn't stop at the stop sign, so but that was the only accident I had.
So you're a woman who has dared and risked and come out on the other side.
Yes, and I loved every place I've been, whether it was Vermont or California or Connecticut. Massachusetts, I was there for a while. I loved every place and I was very fortunate, like I say, having a great uncle who was a priest, and we visited him often, and he was instrumental in my becoming a religious too. And then my father became Catholic in later life. We didn't push him into it. He just, one day the priest said to him, he said, I know you're a good Christian, but would you like to ever think of becoming a Catholic? And he just, so when he passed, he had already been baptized. Well, he was baptized already, but he baptized him later away in the Catholic Church.